Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Peter Shaw Johnson, General Manager of Green Ridge Cemetery in Kenosha. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Carl.
Could you tell me how the Green Ridge Cemetery, or what it was called initially, how that became established?
Well, our first burials took place in February of 1836. Now, Kenosha became Pike back in June 12th of 1835. So our cemetery is more than likely the earliest cemetery in Kenosha County. I know that we're one of the oldest cemeteries in the state of Wisconsin. So it was, it was a pretty space. The Durkee family, Charles Durkee and his wife Catherine, arrived in Kenosha late, like July of 1836. This was after our first burials. And Durkee claimed the property that included Green Ridge. It included, for example, Library Park and where the Kemper Center is. He was able to claim all of that property, purchased it from the federal government. And his wife passed in 1838. She liked the hill that's behind her office, and that's where she ended up being buried. After that, Durkee gave several acres to the community of Pike and Pike Creek, and we began burying people there. I mean, it's a thing that's inevitable that for all of us, none of us get out of this place alive. So, the city needed a burial ground.
Okay, and who supervised this early cemetery?
Well, in the 19th century, it was the community, the city, Kenosha, supervised it, ran the cemetery to the turn of the century. And beginning of the 20th century, the movers and shakers of the community were not really pleased with how the cemetery was being maintained. The roads were dusty, there was a broken down fence, it wasn't cut, it was sort of desolate. And we had some pretty deep pockets in Kenosha at that time. The Simmons family, the Allen family, they ended up getting together and proposing to the city of Kenosha at that time that they form a cemetery association. And at that time, that's when they built the fence, they built the office building, they put the roads in. 1910, they put a water system in throughout the cemetery. So they made some big improvements. They ended up planting trees and maintained the cemetery. So the association was formed in 1906. A cemetery association is made up of all the lot owners. And with the cemetery association, there is a board that is elected by the lot owners. We have an annual meeting once a year. Currently, we have all of our board members are in contact via email. I send emails out on a regular basis, sometimes once a week, if not more.
Okay, you mentioned that the cemetery began with several acres donated by Senator Charles Durkee.
Yes.
How has the cemetery grown in a physical sense?
Well, over time, they acquired property. You have to remember that in the 19th century, the Green Ridge Cemetery was way out in the county. I mean, it was barren property. Most of the cemetery property has never been built on. There is some area along Sheridan Road, south of the Sheridan Road gate, that there were houses there. There were also some houses that went in off of 68th Street. And over time, the Cemetery Association purchased those homes, and they ended up eventually tearing them down and creating additional cemetery space. The area in the far southwest section, which is south of our shop, where the Oscar Zerk stainless steel cross is, where the Camp Harvey was located during the Civil War, which was a training ground of the Wisconsin cavalry going to Civil War. That area was originally a separate cemetery, and in 1920, the Green Ridge Cemetery acquired that cemetery as well.
Okay. When did it become known as Green Ridge Cemetery?
That's a good question. I believe it became known as the Green Ridge Cemetery upon the formation of the association in 1906. I know in the 19th century it was the Kenosha City Cemetery. And prior to that, prior to 1850, I have a map that says it's the Southport Cemetery. I don't have any documents saying it was Pike Creek Cemetery, but I assume that it was.
So how many acres does the cemetery?
We have about 33 acres.
Okay. And how many markers do you have in the cemetery? How many people have been?
Markers, if you want to come over and count sometime, you can, but we have over 35,000 burials in the cemetery. I don't know how many markers we have.
Okay. And how long have you been associated with the cemetery?
I joined the cemetery board in the 1980s, primarily because I have some people say a keen interest in local history. I have a history minor from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I was a long-time history and economics teacher in the school district, and I was interested in Kenosha history. Green Ridge Cemetery, probably the largest area of pulling all sorts of stories together. Every one of the people buried in that cemetery have a huge story. And, Green Ridge Cemetery brings all those stories together.
Okay. And how did you develop your interest, your continued association to becoming the general manager?
Well, when I was first on that board, I was the youngest person on the board, believe it or not. And for many years, I was the youngest person. And into the 21st century, our older board members ended up becoming permanent residents at the cemetery. We needed a new executive board because they passed on. They were in their 80s and 90s. And by 2009, I had already retired from teaching, and what occurred was that our small board, there was nobody else that had the time. I was trying to convince another board member to take on being chairman, which just really means running the board meetings. And he said, Pete, you're retired, you do it. And I, my arm was twisted and I stepped forward to do it in December 7th, 2008.
Okay, and did you expect that you would be doing this for a long time or just a short period of time?
Well, as far as the board chairman, I was expecting to do that for just, until I could no longer do it anymore. As far as becoming general manager, that evolved going from December 7th, 2008 through the middle of July of 2009, when we discovered some irregularities on the cemetery operation. And so July 15th at 11:30, it turns out that I stepped in temporarily to run the Green Ridge Cemetery. Figured I would only run it for a few months until I found somebody that knew what they were doing. Fortunately, I reached out to other cemeterians that operated, for example, the Forest Home Cemetery in Milwaukee, the Highland Memorial Park Cemetery in New Berlin. Those cemeterians and others were, they'd been in the business for a long time, and they assisted me in guiding me on what to do. And I'm still there.
Okay. Can you tell me what kind of staffing takes care of the cemetery?
Okay. Well, currently we have a ground superintendent. We have a part-time mechanic, and then we have 3 additional groundskeepers that help on the cemetery grounds. We're very, very fortunate that my staff has been with us for quite some time, and they take great pride in the maintenance of the cemetery. Also, for the last, maybe 6 years or so, in the summertime, we work with the Kenosha Achievement Center. They bring 4 to 5 individuals along with a supervisor, and they do some smaller jobs. We have some push lawnmowers for them. They learn the weed whippers, and they do general maintenance of the grounds. They several years ago, one of them ended up at the end of the summer. He did such a nice job that we offered him full-time employment, well, seasonal full-time employment, and he's been with us ever since. We also have a part-time gardener that, she maintains our public flower areas, but then she too goes through the cemetery, and if there's a grave site that needs a little attention, she'll clean it up a little bit. That's not something that we guarantee, but she does it on her own accord. And she might put in 8-9 hours a week.
Okay. When the cemetery was established and how it grew, was it ever restricted as in who could be buried in that cemetery?
Oh, no. I mean, it's very, very interesting. I mean, I didn't realize this, but in Wisconsin there were cemeteries up until the 1960s that were just for whites only. Green Ridge Cemetery has always been a very, very progressive cemetery. We have atheists, we have individuals that are agnostic, we have Catholics, we have Jews, we have Hindus, we have Muslims. We have in our earliest known African American burial took place in 1881, and he's buried with other veterans from the Civil War. We don't keep track of their ethnicities. We do not keep track of their religion, because it doesn't matter at Green Ridge Cemetery.
How about economic status? Poor people who don't have any.
Oh, you know, we over in the 19th century we did have areas that were for indigents or for paupers. Today, the federal or maybe the state government has programs to be able to bury individuals that do not have funds for burying.
Okay, so you mentioned a Civil War hero. You have veterans from earlier than that, I suppose.
Oh, we have 3 Revolutionary War soldiers. One of them, Abner Barlow, he was buried June of 1836. We have Jonathan Elkins, who was a prisoner of war. He was Colonel Jonathan Elkins. He died in the 1850s. He was up in his 90s at that time. And then we have Jonathan Coleman, who, when he passed in the 1840s, he was indigent and he was buried in an unmarked grave in a pauper section of the cemetery.
Okay, and so let's talk about some of those other war veterans who are buried there. You mentioned the 3 Revolutionary War heroes. You mentioned a Civil War veteran who is, what was his name? The Civil War veteran that was, they mentioned, was it the African American?
Yeah. The African American, Antoine Dodge. Antoine Dodge, according to his family, his descendants, was born a slave of Governor Dodge, and according to his descendants, he was an illegitimate son of Governor Dodge.
Okay. Any other Civil War here?
Oh, we have all sorts of Civil War veterans. I mean, it's just we have a variety of them. I mean,
Are there any notable war veterans from wars since then? World War I,
well,
World War II,
we have veterans. For example, we have Augustus Quarles. Augustus Quarles was the first person from Wisconsin killed in battle, and he was killed in the Mexican War in the 1840s. The History Center put out a story on him several months ago that his problem, he was a sort of a sitting duck when he dressed up in his dress uniform to go to battle. Well, you know, the opponents saw this guy all in a dress uniform, and they figured he must be a VIP, must be an important person. So he was killed, and you know, as a result, you know, most generals, when they go to battle, look like bums. If you see pictures of U.S. Grant, you know, he just looks like one of the guys. He does not wear his dress uniform. He just looks like, some people would call him, looks like an old bum.
Okay. Any other veterans that you are aware of? Maybe significant from world wars or Vietnam?
You know, John Bullen's father, John Bullen Sr., was General John Bullen, according to his monument, and he was a veteran from the War of 1812. We have many veterans from the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Right now we're seeing more and more Vietnam veterans being buried at Green Ridge Cemetery. We do not have many World War II veterans left, but we have one that we will be burying on Saturday. He was a veteran from World War II. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's just unique that.
So over the expanse of the 33 acres and going back to 1836 forward, can you tell me some of the Kenosha founders who are buried in Greenwood Cemetery and a little bit about
we
that?
have all the Kenosha founders in Green Ridge. I say that we have the founders of Kenosha, we have the blood, sweat, and tears that built Kenosha, we have industrialists, we have some scoundrels in the cemetery as well. John Bullen Jr., who was the president of the association or the corporation, the land corporation that settled Kenosha. We have Reuben Deming, who has been, Reverend Reuben Deming is involved with the Underground Railroad, and Charles Durkee, Z.G. Simmons. I mean, I could go on forever telling you the number of people that are buried there.
Well, can you tell me a little bit more specifically, a little bit more about someone like John Bullen Jr., or someone like Michael Frank?
Well, Michael Frank, Michael Frank was responsible he was mayor at the time that the McCaffrey hanging took place. And he was very, very much against the capital punishment. In his diary, he specifically was very, very upset that hanging took place. And that hanging was, they botched it. The guy, McCaffrey, struggled for about 45 minutes around that noose. And as a result, that the movers and shakers in Kenosha convinced the Wisconsin state legislature in like 1853 to outlaw capital punishment. We were the first state to outlaw capital punishment in the Union. And just a few years ago, Illinois just caught up to us, where they eliminated capital punishment. So, but you can just imagine how difficult it was to petition the government, the state government in Madison in the 1850s. We had, right now you can get to Madison in a couple hours, but it would probably take days to get to Madison back in the 1850s. No roads. It was quite a chore.
Okay, so McCaffrey is one of the scoundrels in the cemetery?
Well, yes, he's one of the scoundrels.
Who was he?
He ended up drowning his wife in a well. The McCaffrey home is still in existence, and he would be somebody that today we would classify as a regular domestic abuser. Supposedly he would get drunk and he would end up getting in big arguments with his wife. And his wife was, in one of those arguments, he drowned her. And that's when, in a court of law, he was tried, and they decided that as a result of his murder of his wife, that he should be executed by hanging. The hanging took place way out in the county. just a little bit north of 68th Street on 14, just east of 14th Avenue. But back then, that was way out in the county. And it was a big spectacle, big show. People from all over came to watch it. And they were horrified seeing him struggle the way he did.
Okay. Are there any other scoundrels you can think of? That little bit of story?
I know that story. I don't know all the other stories.
Okay. You mentioned some of the city founders. What about industrialists that are in the cemetery?
Well,
you mentioned G.G.
David Crossett.
Okay.
David Crossett had an early wagon company. And that wagon company is the one that Edward Bain purchased and expanded. And Edward Bain is buried in the Green Ridge Cemetery. The Z.G. Simmons, the founders of the Cooper Underwear, which is now Jockey today. We have we don't have Charles Nash, but we do have Thomas B. Jeffrey, and several of his sons and their families are buried at Green Ridge Cemetery. Charles Jeffrey survived the Lusitania sinking, and after that, he was a little depressed.
When was that? When was that sinking?
1914, and as a result, he realized that life is short, and he convinced his brothers that let's sell the company. And at the same time, Charles Nash had a little argument at General Motors. He wanted to get a car company named after him, and the powers to be didn't like it. So he found out that the Jeffrey Automobile Company was up for sale. He bought it, and at the same time, he brought from General Motors, he brought quite a few key individuals to the company. That's how Walter Alfred showed up in Kenosha. Alfred supposedly was a real sharp numbers man, good money man, good accountant, and Walter Alfred was one of the individuals that they were, they brought. Nash had a little issue with some of the people that were at the Jeffrey Automobile Company before him. The Winther brothers, Martin and Tony Winther, they developed the four-wheel drive mechanism on the Jeffrey Quad, which carried over when Nash purchased the company. They did the Nash Quad for World War I. Winther's left Nash. I would imagine there may have been some clash. I don't know for sure, but they formed the Winther Motor Car Company on the north side of Kenosha. It eventually evolved into Dynamatic, which now is completely gone from Kenosha, and I believe they merged into the Eaton Corporation.
Okay. Can you think of any other notable people, inventors, that may be in?
We have Oscar Zerk. He developed all sorts of inventions. But the big one was the Zerk grease fitting, that today many pieces of equipment no longer use a Zerk grease fitting. They have sealed grease fittings. But for people of our generation, when you took the car in, it was always greased. But today, very, very few vehicles have grease fittings. But he's one inventor. We have Nick Demas. Nick Demas developed the KAT company, the Kenosha Auto Transport Company. He developed the trailer for piggyback cars traveling, delivering them all over the country. He was an inventor at the cemetery. We have Art Niebler, who invented the jockey brief. Art was, back in the 1930s, developed the jockey brief. He also developed a marketing ploy of wrapping underwear in packs of 3. And they ended up introducing that in the 1930s with at the Merchandise Mart in Chicago. The merchandise, they had a man in his top hat wearing underwear wrapped in cellophane. They had a woman in a bridal veil in her underwear wrapped in cellophane. Pictures went all over the world. Hermann Goering, who is the head of the German Luftwaffe during World War II, saw those pictures, and his comment was, it only shows how degenerate Americans have become. Now that story I got from an individual that stopped at the cemetery about 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago. Art Niebler's granddaughter and her husband. And they stopped in the office, wanted to see where Art was buried. And I said, oh, I know where he's buried. I'll take you over there. And when we were walking towards the grave, she introduced me to her husband. And she says, this is my husband, Hugh Downs. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm not going to ask him, because he's probably asked all the time if he knows the Hugh Downs from ABC News. And I said, I'm not going to go there. And as we're walking over, he told me that he wrote some screenplays for his dad for ABC News about Art Niebler. My jaw dropped and I tripped over it walking over to the gravesite. I was just shocked. I mean, he was actually Hugh Downs' son. Another time, I had somebody that was looking for S.C. Johnson and his daughter, Jenny Lyman. And they were up from Oklahoma. I showed them where S.C. Johnson is, founder of Johnson Wax. I showed them where S.C. Johnson's in-laws, Sereno Fisk, was buried. And then I also showed him where the Lyman lot was that she's buried with the Lyman from the Lyman family, Frederick Lyman, that wrote the history of Kenosha back in the early teens. They were a very interesting family as well.
Okay, so what is going on at the cemetery currently? Where is the cemetery headed beyond being a cemetery?
Okay, well, fortunately, we have several big events going on. One is that along the 66th Street, there's a high ledge that's very, very difficult to maintain. We have a group of volunteers that are heading up a native plant prairie restoration in that area. Have the volunteers include, I've got my cheat notes here, that Ed Antaranium, Tim Garland, who is a landscape architect, George Preble, Crystal Callahan, 2 members of the Chewauquee Prairie Board, Jeff Colonna and Nathan Robertson. And they're working on developing that area as a prairie restoration and native plants. It's going to be a 5 to 6 year project. It's not something that we're not like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz and just click our heels and have it happen. It's a long-range plan. That same group is working on accrediting the Green Ridge Cemetery as a cemetery arboretum. There's only one other cemetery arboretum in the state of Wisconsin, and that's the Forest Home Cemetery in Milwaukee.
What is the point of a cemetery arboretum?
The point is to give people information on what trees look like when they're mature. You know, we have 600 plus trees in the cemetery, and George Preble and his group has identified every tree. We know what each tree is. You know, I mean, I have to go back to the map, and when I look at the tree, I know what an oak tree looks like and a maple tree, but some of them I don't know. They look like a tree. You know, one tree looks like the other. But it will be an area where people can come and visit. The tree will have a QR code where they'd be able to look at the QR code and get some information about that species of trees.
So it's another reason to go into the cemetery other than just to visit.
Another reason to go into the cemetery. Like in the fall, I have all sorts of people that come into the cemetery when the colors change. Instead of going up to Door County, they come to Green Ridge Cemetery because we have so many different species of trees that it's a burst of color, and it's a very, 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 very restful place. I have some individuals that walk through that cemetery every day, and that's what we want. We want people to be able to enjoy it.
And when do you expect that project will be complete?
Well, it's hope that we will have that project completed by early 2026. You know, in May of this year, we're working with the Harborside group, Harborside students, and they're planning to come on a work day to be able to learn more about the cemetery, learn, you know, different trees, and do some projects in the cemetery. Hopefully plant some native bushes and trees to replenish the cemetery. You know, in the last decade, we've lost over 100 green ash trees in the cemetery. It doesn't look it. You know, I mean, yes, when the trees are gone, we notice it, but you know, we've got so many other trees, mature trees, that you know, it still looks very, very well populated with trees. But the thing with trees like humans don't live forever, and we need to start replenishing trees. And so as our older trees die off from maybe storms or disease or just old age, that we'll have new trees coming up to replace them.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.